Hi, everybody. Welcome to this adult debut panel. We're also kind of like an adult like speculative fiction panel too. So that was a really fun coincidence. I didn't plan that at all. Normally, I have to plan like each one being separate, so adult contemporary or adult speculative fiction. But this kind of just happened in a sort of serendipitous way. So I'm very excited for this panel today. If you don't know who I am, my name's Lily. I will be the moderator for today's panel. I'm the face behind Utopia State of Mind. And now we're going to have our authors introduce themselves and tell us about their books. At the end, we should have a little bit of time for questions. So if you have any questions, start thinking about them and then pop them into the live chat whenever you have them, and I will get back to them at the end. So let's start with author bios with AD.
Hi, everyone. I'm Adi Sway. I'm a speculative author of The Dragonfly Gambit, which came out a couple of years ago, and now the Iron Garden Sutra, colloquially known as my yellow book. It's about a very antisocial monk who is sent on a long lost generation ship to perform burial rites for everyone who's passed aboard. Um, During its travels. And when he gets there, he discovers a bunch of academics are there to explore it already. And they're all getting along until some really creepy things start happening. And can't tell you more because that would be spoilery.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm Julie Liu. I write dark fantasy and horror across like both adult and YA. But I'm here today to talk about my adult debut, The Wives of Herrick Hall, which is a sapphic gothic horror about a lady's companion who is banished up to northern England to serve as a lady's companion to a mysterious mistress with a mercurial temper, and like someone who prophesies her death like every night in her dreams. There are ghosts, and she's trapped trying to get out. But then she and her mistress fall in love, and so they try to combat the curse of the house to escape together. But I also won't give any spoilers.
Hi everyone, my name is honestly, I write whatever, but usually it's mostly speculative fiction. I've been dabbling lately in a bit of horror, but my debut novel is Blackest Diamond, which is a dark epic fantasy about two men who accidentally get bound together when one of them performs a spell he probably shouldn't have, while the other is accused of some not so very nice things. It's kind of dark, it's kind of bittersweet, and I just love everything about it.
Hi, I'm Mona. I'm a former pediatric dentist turned writer, thanks to some health hiccups that happened along the way. My debut novel came out this year, just a couple weeks ago. It's called Burn the Sea. It's a historical fantasy about a queen in the 1500s who has to fight off the Portuguese colonizer. Her name is Abacachauta. And in Burn the Sea, I turned the colonizers into giant snake monsters because why other the people who are being colonized when you can other the colonizer instead?
Perfect. I want to start off with the very standard question, which is basically just what first inspired your debut, and what has stayed the same in every draft. So from the first initial conception of it, what has stayed the same? AD, do you want to start?
Sure, I'll start. Um, so I don't have like a happy backstory to the book. I drafted it during a period of time when I was facing a lot of death, and kind of became very curious about this idea of what witnessing this much death kind of does to somebody's psyche and how does it permeate their everyday life? How does it impact their relationships? So I thought, okay, I'm just going to take this guy and make it his entire job and then try to like kind of work that concept through him and take it to its natural conclusion. And so the first chapter got rewritten like 7 or 8 times during editing. It was the first book I queried. It was the first book to go on sub. So it just went through so many iterations. But the first line of the chapter, that particular line, has existed in every iteration of that chapter, and that line appeared like on the second page, and with each edit, it just kept like getting bumped up, bumped up, bumped up until it became the first line in the chapter. And my editor said, "Well, it's not very typical to open a book with kind of an untagged bit of dialogue." And I was like, "I know, I need this. Trust me, because this is a duology." And not to spoil anything, but that line becomes very relevant in the duology, and it has to be the first line in the book. And so she let me have it. So that line just stayed throughout the entire thing. We just kept conveyor belting it higher and higher to the page.
Okay, I gotta hop in. Yeah, like I originally wrote this book. It's the first book I ever wrote, and I had written it just because I have an experiment to like see whether I could write a book. I was working in the entertainment industry at the time and was like very burned out in like the corporate studio life. And I was like, I need to just like fall in love with stories again. So I like kind of like looked back at the types of stories that I loved growing up. And I am a huge like Jane Austen nerd, a huge like, sapphic, like, or just like historical like romance. But like just feeling like I never really fully got to see myself in those books as like a queer person. And so I was like, well, then I'm going to like, write the type of book that I would have wanted to read. And there's going to be like women kissing in it and like, fighting off ghosts together. So it very much started as like a kind of like a just for me, like this is like the book that like I would have liked to read. And then I just like fell in love with the process so much, I just kept like going along with it. And like, I debuted like this week, and it's been like such an amazing like journey. Oh, and then what stayed the same? Like a lot changed because it was the first book I ever wrote, so it was bad at first. I wrote the first draft in something like 2 weeks, as I was like doing one of those like nano like Rimo like challenges back when it existed. And I was like determined to prove to myself I could finish something. So it was bad. So a lot needed to change. But I think like the character, like my main character Josephine, like, and then like ending is like something I always like had in mind. So it was just doing a lot of revisions to like earn that ending. So it was like a kind of like a little masterclass in like, learning how to write a book. So a lot changed.
Jumping in after that, I I started writing Blackest Diamond when I was in high school, so quite a bit has changed because I've grown up since then. But I would have to say that like a lot of the core of the story has stayed the same because it was initially inspired by because I'm very easily inspired. It was inspired by like everything I saw on the internet at the time. The I actually made a post about this last year, but the main inspirations were the art of this artist called Tara Terrific. She draws a lot of angels, and in particular, her orchestral angels, her angels that like play instruments, was a really big inspiration for the species that the main character is from. And then this webcomic called Unsounded by Ashley Cope was another inspiration because at the time I was really obsessed with webcomics. I was just like on the internet all the time reading as many webcomics as possible. And I found that one. I was like, oh, I like this a lot. I really like the expansive dark fantasy world of this. So I'm going to put that in my brain and let it irrevocably change me. And then lastly, the main thing that inspired Blackest Diamond was sort of weird, but like I was a bit of a strange child, but it was religious syncretism in ancient Egypt, particularly the way when the Greeks when the Greeks were coming in, the Egyptians, they didn't necessarily like how do I put this into words? Like, I'm pretty sure we all know what syncretism is, but basically they adopted the Greek gods into their own pantheon and sort of mixed them two together so that the Greek pantheon and the Egyptian pantheon existed at the same time, but also in Greek religion throughout the centuries, it was a lot of like different cosmologies and cosmogonies were existing at the same time. So I really like the idea of like two things can be true at the same time. And I put that into my story in a way that it does not appear clear in the beginning, but I hope reveals itself throughout the end. And because of that, like really strong core inspiration and like visual inspirations that have stuck with me since I was a teenager. A lot of, as I said earlier, a lot of the I guess outside of this, like the way the story looks from the outside hasn't changed, but on the inside, I believe things have like gotten a lot deeper.
I would say I'm jumping in, but I'm kind of last. So I'm just, hopping on the train. Um, let's see, what inspired Burn the Sea? It's not like the happiest inspiration. Once again, I started writing it right as I started becoming very, very ill. And it's very strange to see bits of yourself going away in real time and to lose things that you once took for granted. And because I just felt like I was disappearing. And I happened to watch this one movie about another Indian queen who fought against British colonization. And it was really interesting because I feel like whenever something like that happens, you get a whole bunch of clickbait, right? Like 5 other queens you've never heard of, but should be on your list, and I'm just like, oh yeah, let's go, let's go. This is a great rabbit hole. And I ran into Abaka Chauta and I was like, why have I never heard this story? Like, I am Indian. My parents kind of brought me up honoring that tradition and really ingraining that part of me into my life. Yes, we have lived in America, but my roots are Indian. And it bothered me that I didn't know about her. My parents actually, who grew up slightly north of where she's from, had never heard of her. Like her community keeps her alive, but it just felt like she should be known and celebrated so much more. And I hated that, she too had been slowly erased by the powers that be because she wasn't on their side. She wasn't on the winning side, so she gets put to the side. And so, in a kind of like parallel way, I could kind of understand the idea of like disappearing in erasure, and it bothered me enough to write a whole book about it. So I did, and it was definitely a good experience and an important one for me, and I'm thankful that it resulted in the book that it did. As far as what stayed the same, it's the first line of the book, has been the first line of the book ever since I conceived it. The little girl with big brown eyes can see the bones in the corner. That has stayed ever since. I was like, well, she's going to meet a giant green lion, and that's going to be the opening of the book. And once that happened, every single draft, that line has stayed the same. And I think that that's probably one of the lines that people talk about a lot to me. So I'm glad that it stayed the way it has.
So we have a few different kind of like origin stories about sort of when people's ideas came to them and when, you started wanting to become a writer. So I'm interested, what was a misconception about being a writer you had before your debut? Julie, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, I feel like I had a lot, and I feel like because I feel like some of the, everyone's path to publishing is so different, so it can feel like the industry is so like opaque and like hard to like understand. But yeah, like I feel like there are things like so much of being an author is like not writing, which is like trying to find the balance of still being creative, but also it's you're like it's like a business too. Was like trying to find that balance, and I think too, like the goalposts for success keep shifting, especially like as you progress. So you think you get a book deal, like as you're querying, like all you want to do is get an agent, and like then as soon as you get an agent, all you want to do is go on submission, and then all you want to do is like get a book deal. Then just as you go, it just keeps moving, and you never feel like you've made it. So I think that is like so important to like protect your love of the process and define success on your own terms, and remember that as like you hit it, you can sometimes be like, oh, like that's nothing, like it's that you have your eye on the prize for, and you just be like, oh yeah, but a year ago, like Julie of a year ago couldn't believe it, this is our life now. So like that's how like I define success, because it's so easy to kind of get lost like as you go. But yeah.
So many things. I had so many misconceptions about being a writer, because I was under the impression that all you have to do is write, and technically, yes, all you have to do is write, but it's so much more than that. And I'm kind of just like Not regretting, but like wishing past me knew a little bit more what they were getting into, because I feel like my understanding of what being like a published writer is has been flipped entirely upside down by publishing, because publishing from the outside, it makes everything seem so like I thought everything like moved so fast. I thought it was like a very smooth and oiled machine, but as we all know here, it's not very smooth, it's not very oiled, and it's certainly not very fast at all.
I totally agree with what Julie and UM have talked about. Both those aspects are very true. The timing in particular was just like mind-boggling to me. Um, I think another preconceived notion that I had was just I didn't really understand how writing changes so much from the time that you write until it gets published, right? You edit your book and you send it to beta readers before you even query, right? So you're like, aha, I've edited my book and it's gonna be queried. Then you get your agent and you get to edit all over again before going on sub. And then after that, it gets picked up by an editor. And guess what? Editors also want to edit. Like, and you don't just edit once for any of those rounds. There's dev, there's line, there's copy. And then you get to the cold readers by the time you want to publish, and you're just like, I've read this book so many times. So part of it is just maintaining your interest in what you've written. So it is good incentive to write as interesting a book as you can, because you will be reading it more than anyone else in the world. And I don't think that I really understood the degree to which that was true until I got in it.
Just going off of what Mona just said, everybody here will know what a bad thing this is, but I got to copy edits and I read this one scene and I told my copy editor, no, it wasn't copy. Sorry, it was even worse. It was past pages. And I was like, actually, the scene's not working at all. Can I rewrite it? And my design team went, okay. And to make it easier, I counted the number of lines that it was, and I rewrote it an exact same number of lines. So the formatting didn't change, but I'm evil. I didn't realize how much accounting is involved in being an author, because I think that's kind of the thing you don't think about when you're writing, because you're like, it's about the craft, it's about the art, and then your royalties come in or your advance comes in and you're like, oh, I'm a freelancer now. How much do I set aside for taxes? In Canada, we have a very robust grant kind of system. Not super robust, but it's very good. And the reason why I can keep writing is because of these grants. Grants are taxed different from income. So when you have regular income coming in and grants income from different sources and then royalties from different publishers, you're like collecting all of this. You're going to your accountant and you're like, please fix my life for me. Um, and I didn't realize that that would be such a big part of my life, just keeping track of all of these different things. Because nobody like tells you that when you're querying or when you have an agent. Like I feel like that's the first thing we should be telling people the moment they go on sub, like start looking for a good accountant. Because if everything goes well, like that man or woman will be like your lifesaver.
Yeah, I definitely, yeah, I like asking this question because I do feel like there are so many things that you don't even conceive of like being even an issue until it happens. Um, and yeah, and it just reinforces this idea that you have to write something you love, because if you don't, you will just hate it by the end, having to read the thing over and over again. Um, and it brings me kind of to my next question, which is, as we've mentioned, like, unintentionally a speculative fiction panel. But what I want to know specifically is about genre fiction, so about speculative fiction as a whole, right? What draws you all to speculative fiction, and specifically what like continues to spark joy, right? Because it's different to have first been like, oh, I like reading about this, but then what continues to spark joy for you even now? And I'm also kind of interested in knowing, what do you all think that genre fiction, so speculative fiction as a whole, can do that no other genre can, right? Because I think speculative fiction as a whole has had ups and downs in terms of critical reception of the broader public. So I'm interested to know all of those different things. Do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So right away, good question. Love Marie Kondo. She's an icon. Awesome. But also to answer the question, really, so I simply think speculative, like this is sort of such a lame answer, but I just simply think speculative fiction is really cool. I will be browsing Goodreads or like publisher pages, and I'll see the description for a book that sounds frankly awesome, and I'll be like, okay, yeah, this is cool. I love speculative fiction because people are just so damn creative, and I would never have thought of something like this. I would never like, and it just and reading their stories inspires me, and like that inspiration I hope to pass on to other people. And I just think speculative fiction is the perfect um, breeding ground for like massive, inspirational, mind bending, out of pocket, out of this world ideas that you genuinely don't find in other genres. And like I grew up reading fantasy and fairy tales, like Disney hardcover, hardback, like chapter books, fairy tales, like, I was that child. So I feel like I always knew I was going to write genre fiction anyways. And I personally, at this point in my life, can't see myself writing anything but speculative fiction because it like continues to spark joy. It continues to make me the happiest when I'm writing. It continues to, like, when I'm writing, like genuinely make me want to find out, oh, what's going to happen next in my own story that I already planned out like a year ago, because it's just like, wow, I can't believe I made this world with my own mind. And that's just, I just love that feeling of making a whole world with my own mind that you can get in other genres, of course, because world building is something that occurs in every genre, but world building in speculative fiction is something that's just so special that I'm sure like everybody here understands. It's a space for limitless imagination, outlandish storytelling, and a friend of mine said last year, like, she likes speculative fiction because why would she spend time writing something that doesn't excite her? And I love that, because why would I spend time writing something that doesn't excite me? And speculative fiction excites me, which is like at the core of it all. It excites me.
That's such a great question. Multifaceted. So I'm going to try to get to every bit, but let me know if I've missed something. In addition to everything that you have just said, I have also always been a speculative fiction girly. Like, I swear, I got my hands on Redwall and did not look back. You know, what's better than tiny mice fighting with swords and eating and drinking amazing things, right? Um, but I continue to remain interested in speculative fiction because I think it serves as a really interesting way to hold a mirror to the present without a lot of the preconceived notions that people have. So it's one of those things. Confirmation bias is real. Like, we all have our ideas about things. And so if we encounter it in a very real sense, we tend to have preformed opinions about it because that's how we survive this world. So what do? You put someone in a different world. You don't give them a lot of the context, and then you have to make a decision anew. And it's a really interesting opportunity for authors to explore something that maybe people thought they understood and show a different side of it to see if that changes their understanding. And maybe it confirms what they already knew, or maybe it changes it, but it's a lot easier, I find, to like be more objective in a way. If I turn the colonizers into snake monsters and I say, here's the story of the people that were already there, when all you've heard about is the story from the colonizers' point of view, then maybe when you realize, like, oh, actually the colonizers are the Portuguese and they're not actually snake monsters, you're just kind of like, oh, wait, these people have been there the whole time. And that's like a very unique opportunity, I think, that speculative fiction offers. And I love so many other genres, but this is the one that I will probably always continue to write in because it's the one that I feel most at home in.
I kind of grew up on a lot of spec fic. I grew up on a lot of kind of the golden age of sci-fi. It used to get translated into like Turkish, and then it would get translated into Ukrainian or Russian, and then my parents would like get their hands on the contraband in the Soviet Union, and that's like kind of what I grew up on. But I think speculative fiction allows you kind of just enough distance that, like Mona said, you can do the commentary on the present. But I think in many ways, especially depending on where you are geographically, it kind of protects you because you can critique the current state of affairs without making it so blatantly kind of connected to the current state of affairs. And I think as an author, very often that gives you plausible deniability if you're writing. Um, that you're not going to get censored, or in many cases you're not going to go to prison. And so like in the Soviet Union, you have a lot of folks writing about the state but using the speculative medium as a way to critique it, but also kind of say, I'm not talking about the Soviet Union, I'm talking about a fictional land, like I'm perfectly safe here and everything's fine. um, and I love speculative fiction for that. I love that element of distancing. I do find recently I'm skipping across kind of some stories demand to be speculative stories, and other stories can be more lit ficky. I think I'll always have one foot in spec fic um, because it's like my first love. You never forget your first love. But I'm definitely like diversifying as well.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with like what everyone has said. I think it's like an exciting space because you're really only limited by the rules you make for it, and it's very freeing, and it's like it exercises like the imagination, and I also agree like with like AD and Mona and UM that like it's a very like political, like inherently political genre where you can explore kind of like what you were grappling with as a society, and do it in a way that's very imaginative, but also like you do have this like it asks the reader to engage with it like on different levels of that what they want. Like you can read it just as like a fantasy story about like fairies or ghosts or something, or you can like dig deeper and be like, what is this like trying to say, and like what are we in conversation with? And I think that makes it like a very interesting genre, I think, especially for like diverse and marginalized voices that have been traditionally excluded from a lot of these spaces, because entering it and being like taking those like genre conventions and like the limitless like possibilities of the genre and exploring new and like often suppressed voices. I think it makes it like such a like there's like a big surge. At least those are the spec fic I tend to read because I find them like so engaging and so inventive and so like fresh and very vitally like recharging the genre space.
The moment in a book where they're like, is this play about us? Kind of moment where it all comes full circle and you realize the mirrors, yeah, that have been going on like throughout the whole thing. I want to jump to some more specialized questions, and I want to remind everyone watching that if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. I want to ask about history and uncovering the truth behind it, as well as like misconceptions, subjectivity, objectivity, all of those things. It's an important theme in both Blackest Diamond and Burn the Sea. So for both of these books, can you both talk about what it's like to explore that theme, like why you're drawn to it, and also how you balance history and the present, right? So you don't get bogged down in the history. Like, how do you honor history and move forward? How do how do you balance that relationship? Mona, do you want to start?
Ooh, that question hit home because it was really hard to do the research for this book. Abaka Chauta is kept alive through a lot of beautiful oral tradition. She's kept alive through a dance tradition, actually, in her hometown, and she's definitely present regionally. But when you think about which texts have survived from the 1500s, which texts have been translated, which texts are available through academic sources. A lot of them are Portuguese. A lot of them are Portuguese. And more Indians are writing about history and like taking the space and being recognized. And I mean, people have always existed, right? But it's kind of like which information is made readily available. And frankly, a lot of it was the Portuguese sources, and it was really, really hard to read this commentary and like encounter this notion that, well, the Portuguese were really there to help out this very like uncivilized or even harsher terms nation. And it was actually a very developed nation. They had a complex economy, multiple religions existing together, and it just wasn't what people expected. It wasn't a monotheistic like Christian nation. So therefore, it well, it really couldn't be respected. And honestly, we should probably help these people out. And if they end up needing to pay us, that's probably what we deserved. And like that's the lens of so much of what I found, and it was absolutely infuriating. And I think you can probably tell a little bit if you read Burn the Sea that I was pretty furious about it. So in terms of like what to bring from the modern lens, like I was bringing my family's pride in our roots, right? Like it is wild to think about all of the accomplishments of a nation and like to have been brought up knowing that British colonization took $45 trillion from the Indian economy, and like to be aware of all of that and to then to go back and read these sources. And so putting those two together and coming up with a narrative that embraced the idea that there are whole and complex people being flattened in order to justify, just object theft. Like that was an important part of the writing process. I don't know if I've addressed everything there, but that's kind of my spiel.
Going off like a different angle, because my story Black Assignment is secondary world fantasy, though, so there's no like real historical inspiration, though there are like kind of not necessarily historical analogs, but I, as a fan of history, ancient history specifically, I just obviously had to include a little like sprinklings of those things, especially ancient Egypt, but that's beside the point. But when writing Black Assignment, I always knew that like historical secrets and reframing said historical knowledge would be central to the twists near the end of the book, because I guess I'm of the opinion that recently, like more lately, that history, I don't know how to put this into words. Like, I'm not trying to be philosophical here, but like history is a living thing. Like history never leaves us. History is like, I guess you could say, quote, haunting us all the time, which is the sort of effect that I wanted to have my characters have too, that they're being haunted by history, whether or not they know it. Because like you will, even here in North America and Canada where I am, you will look around and say, oh, that's just like a normal forest or whatever. But like you won't know that, and like a lot of people won't know that, like even like 500 years ago, the Indigenous people of Canada, they used to live here. They used to, this was their home. Like they do live here still, obviously, but like I'm saying, like they used to be like actively here. They weren't like pushed out of the land that belongs to them. They weren't like forced to live in like reservations that the colonizers like push them into. Like this was a place that was like actively much more alive in a sense, like years ago. And it just kind of, that every time I think about that, it sort of like hurts. Like even now I'm just getting like a choked up feeling in my throat at the idea that people think that history is something that's like dead, and that like it's gone, it's in the past, let's just forget it, let's like move on. But they're not acknowledging the fact that like it's something that will always be with them. They are walking on land that's been there like before. They're like they're interacting with things that they just don't have any context for, or any realization of just how deep and how powerful and how like important it was to people who they think are gone. And the idea of everything is important in a way you just don't realize it yet, or you are too caught up in your own personal history to realize that you are more than just like if you're 20 years old, you're more than your 20 years. You're the years of everybody who's ever come before you, everybody who's made choices that affect your life right now. And I guess, sort like closing out my spiel, I wanted to, in Blackest Diamonds, really like hammer in the idea that the sins and the choices and the ancient mistakes of everybody that's come before you is always affecting you, and it's something that you can either accept, run away from, actively seek out, but you're never going to like really escape it. All you can do is like discover the truth and live with it, or die with that realization. Sort of a sad ending, but yeah.
Yeah, I love this, what you said about this idea of it being sort of a living thing that is like consistently growing, evolving, and also that you specifically mentioned that we are contributing to it. Like all of our actions are walking in the footsteps and also continuing the path of the things that came before us, and like the things that we will bring to the future past, I guess. Um, and now I want to talk about the setting specifically in the Iron Garden and the Wives of Haircall, because they're so important to the story. To me, they almost felt like becoming characters in and of themselves. So I would love if there's a specificity to the setting, as well as sort of a living, sort of breathing entity feeling to both of these. So I'd love if you could both talk about the development of the setting kind of as a whole, and the ways that it changed throughout the process. I'm just interested to know if like how much of this was kind of there from the beginning, and then how much of it was built up sort of, as it went on. AD, do you want to start?
Sure. So back when I first started drafting tags, I was living out on the West Coast. And so you have these old growth forests full of redwoods. And these are massive trees. And they are also super, super old. Like there's a tree, it's called Big Red, and it's estimated to be 1,800 years old. Um, so there's this tree is in itself this well of history. It existed here. Like this is going off on the history kind of question, but I just remember standing there and I was thinking how like this tree was here like when Christopher Columbus hasn't touched land. He didn't exist. So many nations didn't exist. And this tree was already a fully formed tree and it was hanging out there. And so for me, those trees kind of inspired the environment of the Iron Garden Sutra, which is this like derelict spaceship the size of a city that's overgrown with a bunch of vegetation. Um, in a way that I became very fascinated about how like nature will just kind of persevere. We're just this small blip um, on its kind of lifeline. And I really wanted that sense of scale, that temporal scale to exist within the setting. So a lot of the architecture of the ship is meant to instill this feeling of smallness and insignificance in the face of time, of the universe, of the distance that the ship kind of crossed. Um, and that was kind of there from the very beginning. None of that really changed, but it's very much inspired by real plays. There's obviously a lot of speculative elements that went into it afterwards, but it was very much like the redwoods on the West Coast. Beautiful place. If you have the opportunity, go hug some trees. You won't be able to because they are massive and you cannot wrap your arms around them, but it really does make every little concern and every little human accomplishment just completely pale in comparison to the lifespan of this one tree. Um, And that's my very hippie-esque answer to that question.
Yeah, I'll second the view, like you see the redwoods if you can. Like one of my favorite memories is like driving them at night. It's like so eerie and otherworldly. But yeah, like for in terms of like the setting, yeah, I spent a long time like developing like Herrick Hall as like as a character, kind of like of his own right, because I feel like it's very much part of like the Gothic tradition to have like these like settings that like feel like real like characters like bristling with like menace. But I also wanted to, because the book is very much kind of like a haunted house story, but it's like kind of like a metaphor for like kind of the systemic entrapment of like women by men, and like for much of the early part of the book, the men are absent from it. It's just like these women, kind of like locked in a power play, falling in love. And I like I wanted to make sure the stakes always felt like high in the sense of like if they step out of line, there are like systems in place, men who will kind of like take care of that. And I wanted the house to kind of like be the stand-in for like the absent men, where it's like overseeing their interests even if they're not there, so they're never fully safe. Like this is not like being up north and banished and isolated together while the falling in love is not like oh, we're hidden from the world, we can do what we want. Is very much like they're still very much stuck in the system. So it definitely took a lot of like revisions and passes to like make the house like it's a setting, but it's also like an antagonistic character in the book. So yeah, it's yeah, like describing it was like a lot of fun in terms of like building it, because it's like this house that a lot of men in this like family have kind of like tried to like control and implant their vision on it. So it's like this monstrous looking house with like a lot of different like architectural styles, because it's just like these men coming in and stamping their mark on it. So it was like a lot of fun to write. But yeah, it was definitely like a challenge to like it took many passes.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned the haunted house as a character, as sort of a tenant of the Gothic literature. I feel like you can instantly tell, or maybe not instantly, but as soon as you get there, you can instantly tell that like that's the way it's going. um, I want to know from you all, because I'm interested in finding out sort of what part of the book writing process was your favorite and least favorite. So you write like there's writing and editing and revising and sort of putting all the last touches on it. So what is your favorite? What's your least favorite? And in regards to your least favorite, obviously it's still an important part of the process. So how do you reconcile with like having to do your least favorite part? Do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Should I say all of it? All of it is my favorite. Like I just love writing. Like it's hard sometimes, obviously. It can be difficult. My motivation is lacking in a certain at certain times, but I really can't say that I have a least favorite part of the writing process. Though like my favorite is revising, because I just love like rewriting all my work all the time because I can't get enough of writing. But I guess if I had to like pick, I would say like the nitty-gritty of like editing, like copy editing would probably be the quote unquote least favorite, because I don't know, like the nitty-gritty and like the struggle between like accepting, will this change be the best for the book, or do I want to stick more to the sentence that I wrote, like the way I wrote it, even though it might not necessarily like make not make the most sense, but even though it's like not as correct as it should be, like is this what I wrote? This is what I wrote for a reason, and I probably want to stick to it, versus this is probably going to help the reader better understand what I'm trying to say. Like it's really a balance between like poetry and clarity, I guess.
So there are so many phases of writing that I did not know existed before I published my first book. So I think that my favorite stage is probably a dev edit when you have an editor that gets you. That, when you and your editor click, it creates this beautiful synergy and you have the ability to like see the book that you turned in, still love it, but like be motivated to elevate it and have a vision for it. And so that is like a really magical time, in my opinion. Like that's when I really kind of am like, yes, like let's go. And I can work like crazy then because I've got the bones and I'm just kind of like moving things around and it's like just really, really cool. In terms of least favorite, I think probably by the time we get to cold reads, I'm very much over it. Cold reads are like the very last stage. Your book has been formatted, it's had the copy edits, everything is basically done, and someone comes in with fresh eyes to look for any little errors. And you'd think like, oh, it's little, it's no big deal. But also this is your very last chance to catch anything. But by then you've read your book so many times that I can basically recite it. And it's really horrifying that you can recite 140,000 words, but like truly by the time you get there, you just know it so well that it's hard to focus. And I get kind of uninspired because I'm like, this whole book is so predictable. But it's also predictable because I've memorized the thing. Like it's just kind of a disenchanting phase for me. So I don't love that, but that's also just because it feels redundant by then.
I thought I was going to be the only one who would say that editing is my favorite part, but it feels like everybody loves to edit. I'm going to get even more specific than that. My favorite part is like the initial edit I do after I have a draft, um, because I tend to draft quite lean. So if the final word count is, let's say, 120,000 words, my initial draft is like 90, 95. So everything's there. It's just bare bones, right? And so on that first pass, I go through and I'm like, okay, now I'm adding atmosphere. Now I'm actually working with my white rooms and I'm making them into actual spaces. My characters now have a face and some clothing. Until then, they were just like Ken dolls, completely naked. And so it's really, really, really fun to see the story come out and be quite close to kind of the vision that I had for it. My least favorite part is the initial drafting process. Um, because if I'm a plotter, so I will have like an Excel spreadsheet. I'll know exactly what goes into each chapter. I know exactly how everything's going to end. And here's the problem. The moment I find out how the story is going to end, I lose all interest in writing it. And so whenever I'm drafting, I have to constantly kick my ass to just put more and more words on the page. And my solution for that is to draft really fast. So that first draft of 90, 95,000 words, it's a month. So I just draft as fast as I can. Then I chuck that thing into a drawer or like a virtual drawer of my Dropbox, and I don't touch it for a month. And then finally, I allow myself after a month to go back and actually turn it into a story and not just a series of actions. Um, so yeah, those are my favorite parts.
Yeah, and I mean, like I echo that. I'm also so much like better, I think, in revisions, because I find that crafting, like I feel like refining something from something that already exists is so much easier than trying to create something from nothing. And I am also a plotter, but I feel like the story and the characters never feel like really alive to me in the first draft. Again, I feel like it's just like plotting out like these like little figurines, and you're just like moving them around, things are happening, and it's like usually through drafting that I discover who they are. Like I try to do all like the get to know your characters like sheets like before you get to plotting, and no matter how much I do, they won't feel real to me until I'm like putting them in scenes and like figuring out what they want and who they are, which is like important work, but so excruciatingly like you sit in front of I can sit in front of my laptop for like 2 or 3 hours and still have like 100 words on a page because of just trying to like think things through. So like revisions, I feel like are definitely where I feel like I can bring the story alive because I know what it is now because I've gone through that initial draft. And like AD, like I speed draft my first drafts just because I need to get to the point where I have something to like revise. And then I take a while to like revise because it's usually like a huge mess that I need to fix, and it's sometimes really discouraging. But I'm like, well, at least I'm not like drafting. But I also echo like UM's like sentiment by like ultimately like it's all like really fun, and it's all we're all like doing the things that we were like dreaming of doing. So even if you're like up at midnight doing like copy edits, like wanting to bang your head against the wall, like I worked in the entertainment industry, and I had a lot of different like bosses, and I felt like I was always like doing things for other people, and like now I feel like all the problems I have are like my own when I'm like writing, because I'm like it's like I had seen this quote that something like it was like what a privilege it is to be like stressed about problems of your own making. So it's kind of like at the end of the day, if it's like copy edits at like midnight, I'm like this is still what I'd rather be doing like than anything else. So it's still a lot of fun, even though it can be very, very excruciating sometimes.
You've become your own boss, and now you're your own worst nightmare. You're the hardest boss you'll ever have. I have some hopefully more fun or like not interesting, but like more. I wouldn't also say creative. I'm struggling to phrase this, but like I have some more questions that don't really regard sort of are strictly about the book, and they are a little bit more playful. I guess playful is what I want to say. I want to know what movie you would give or recommend to readers with your book. Like if you had to pair your book and a movie to say like read this and also watch this before or after, what one would you pick? Julie, do you want to start?
Sure. I felt like when I was writing it and like first conceiving it, I had like two movies that really like marinated in the back of my mind as I was writing it were the Portrait of a Lady on Fire, which is like this big beautiful like historical sapphic like romance that has like this like very like tender intimate like feel. And then also The Favorite by Yorgos Lanthimos. I just love the idea of these women who are like locked in this like power like struggle, but also like in love. So I felt like those two. I was trying to capture like the tender intimacy of like the romance with like the power struggle. What would you do when you're like you're like have a intimate relationship with somebody who like also wields power over you?
I'm gonna second what Julie said about The Favorite. The Favorite is such a good movie, and it's so low-key funny. I love that movie. You should watch it. But also, this question sort of feels impossible to answer for me because I'm a very visually oriented person. So if I had to pick a movie, it'd have to be something that like matches visually, and I cannot think of like a good. When I say good, I mean like good, like not like B movie grade movie that I would recommend for you to watch to get the same feeling as Blackest Diamond, unless you want to watch like my guilty pleasure Dracula Untold from the Dark Universe before they were trying to do that. But if I had to pick a TV show, I would pick Castlevania, the animated Netflix show, because I'm obsessed with that show, and I did comp that show for Blackest Diamond. So And I also would just want you to watch Castlevania.
I thought I've been like just baffled because I'm sitting here and being like, have I ever watched a movie in my entire life? Just like, wait a minute. Obviously I have. The best comp though is probably from Indian cinema, which is Bajirao Mastani, but I understand that maybe not everyone wants to watch a 3-hour epic film in Hindi, but it is visually and probably even in terms of like having a warrior queen, the most anchored in Burn the Sea. In terms of media in English, I would actually consider The Great an interesting comp for a time period like towards the middle of the book because it gives a little bit of insight into some of the dynamics that are happening with the characters where you've got like a highly overqualified woman dealing with her bumbling husband who happens to be king. Um, and it's just in a very different way that's applicable to Burn the Sea. So I mean smash Bajirao Mastani with The Great and you'll get it.
I think it's me. Yes. Okay. This is going to be polar opposites of each other. On one end of the spectrum, pick any alien movie, any of them, the classic ones, Prometheus. I don't know, take your pick. On the other end, I'm going to recommend a very underrated anime, which is called Mushishi, which is about a guy who is walking around feudal Japan and is helping a bunch of villagers coexist with these spirits called Mushi. It's very, now I think it would be considered cozy, although there are like serious circumstances, but it's very kind of embraces Japanese philosophy of Shinto and religion of Shinto and coexisting with your natural environment and kind of nothing is inherently evil. Everything is just competing systems. Um, or you can go watch Alien. I don't know. I feel like both of these things kind of really get at the core of the book.
Okay, and my last question, I'm gonna have to rewatch this panel later and like write down all of these recommendations. I normally have to anyway. My last question is if your main character or if a character, right, from your book could give you a piece of advice, what do you think they would say? Mona, do you want to start?
If my character was giving me advice, I think that she would say, don't hesitate when you know what's right. Because I tend to have very strong feelings about ethics and I try to like find the most PC way to say them so that way like it's easier to listen and to swallow the bitter pill. But I think that one thing that I admire about Abaka is that when she feels that she knows what's right, she just does the thing. And she's just like, you want to come and be by my side? Great, come be right with me. And if you don't, like, screw you, you're wrong anyway. And she just keeps moving on. And I think that that's like kind of powerful.
I think before the events of the book, I would generally ignore anything Iris tells me. After the events of the book, I think he would say that to value people above everything else and your own personal comfort and your own spiritual leanings mean nothing if you have to sacrifice other people to maintain that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I also wouldn't listen to advice from Josephine like before the book because I'm like, girl, you have a lot to learn. But by the end, I feel like, she'd probably say like something like, invulnerability like may like grant you like safety or like the safety of invisibility, but vulnerability doesn't have to be a weakness. Like you have to you have to like, know who to trust, but you can let people in. You can't close yourself off completely because you won't have like a very like full or authentic life. And vulnerability can also be a chance to like have a genuine connection with somebody, and you can't like, you don't live a full life if you don't let people in.
Yeah, similarly to AD and Julie, I wouldn't listen to anything Asaru has to say because he does not take his own advice. Because I feel like the advice he would give me is it's not too late to rely on other people yet. But because he's stubborn like that, he would not listen to his own advice. So why should I listen to him?
We have unexpectedly ended on such wisdom from everybody else. I want to thank everyone for watching. Thank you as well to all of these authors. I've left the bookshop.org links for all of the books in the description box below. So please go check them out and go buy them, request them from your library. I want to thank everyone. I just want to thank everyone as well for joining us today and spending a little bit of time with us. And I hope everyone has a really great rest of your day. Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much.